Yeah, it's a big question. I think this is maybe not just true for athletes in Nova Scotia, but just generally that age group of high school athletes is you see it more and more like the pressures from the outside world about all of the social media influence and discipline, things from their parents, things from their friends, things from their phone. It's just all over the place. And I feel it too. And I didn't grow up in that kind of space. So I think a lot of what I try to do is bring them back into here and now, what can we do in this moment? What's controllable for you? What's not controllable for you? And how do you kind of go through anything that you don't actually have control over? So how can you deal with it in the time and how can you process it later?
Welcome back to Trauma, Training and Transformation, the space where we explore movement heals the mind. Our environments build resilience and how the right support becomes a scaffolding young athletes need to grow. Today, we're looking at scaffolding through the lens of rugby, the mental structures that hold young players steady as they step into the pressures of high-performance sport. Joining me today is Emma Delory, a vital force in Nova Scotia's provincial rugby pathway. Emma's influence extends far beyond the technical coaching. She helps young athletes build emotional stability, mental robustness, and the confidence needed to thrive in a demanding performance environment. Her work isn't just about developing players, it's about developing people. Emma, thank you very much for joining us today. For the benefit of our listeners, please introduce yourself.
Yeah, thanks for having me, James. Yep, my name is Emma Delory. I was born and raised in Halifax, Nova Scotia, and it's where I coach rugby full-time now. So I'm the performance coach with the Provincial Union, Rugby Nova Scotia. And most of my work is around our provincial programs, our academies, that kind of high school age group of athletes. And I also work with the Rugby Canada U18 East group as well.
Thank you very much. So, Emma, your coaching style blends structure, support, and psychological insight, which is great for this podcast. You create environments that young athletes can grow, not just physical performance, but in resilience, decision making, and emotional maturity. You build a scaffolding that holds them steady when challenges hit, the pressures of selection, the challenges around that, self doubt, setbacks, and the weight of expectation. And also your mentorship often becomes the difference between an athlete surviving high performance for rugby and actually flourishing in that environment. So when you look at athletes coming through Nova Scotia pathway today, what mental and emotional challenges do you see them wrestling the most? And how do you start to build resilience and psychological robustness from day one?
Yeah, it's a big question. I think this is maybe not just true for athletes in Nova Scotia, but just generally that age group of high school athletes is you see it more and more the pressures from the outside world about all of the social media influence and discipline, things from their parents, things from their friends, things from their phone. It's just all over the place. And I feel it too. And I didn't grow up in that kind of space. So I think a lot of what I try to do is bring them back into here and now, what can we do in this moment? What's controllable for you? What's not controllable for you? And how do you kind of go through anything that you don't actually have control over? So how can you deal with it in the time and how can you process it later? And so selection certainly is huge on that. But a lot of it is also just if I've got a hockey practice and I have to talk to my coach and I've got a rugby practice and these things collide, how do I kind of manage the expectations of all of these different people and how to keep really good relationships with folks, I guess, through that. That's a big thing that I'm seeing right now. A lot of that's because a lot of our athletes in Nova Scotia are multi-sport athletes. So they do have a lot of different things going on. And that seems to be something that comes up quite often is managing a bunch of different sports, different coaches, different expectations. And yeah, I guess for me, one of the biggest pieces is just having a conversation as a human, from a human to another human, really trying to help them understand that long term, one practice here, one practice there, it's not going to make a difference. It's really about are you committed to doing this long term? Are you okay with having those conversations about right now I'm in hockey, it's competition season, I'm going to have to miss a practice. If they're okay with having that conversation with two different adults, then I think that's a great skill for them to have and bring forward that's going to help them through their lives. So I think there's a million different things that you could say and want to work through with your athletes. But for me, it's all about speaking to them, just a person to a person, and really trying to come up with solutions that make sense for them in that moment and just supporting them through their decision making, no matter what it ends up being.
No, I totally agree. I mean, the work that you and all the provincial coaches do in Nova Scotia is you're trying to work with the right type of athlete, but also with the right group of coaches. Those who have the skill sets to be able to provide an environment that's nurturing, but also safe. But within that, you must provide a structure. So how does your structure, consistency help your athletes build confidence?
Yeah, I think like again, it's a lot of them owning the process. So, what do you want to get out of this? What are your goals? And I'm just here to support you in your journey and your pathway to doing that. And everybody's goals will look different. Like, for example, I never had the desire within me to try and play for a national team. It's a lot of work and it takes a lot of time and effort. And it wasn't one of the goals that I had for myself. But I really wanted to help support the people around me who are trying to have that as their goal. I really like pushing myself as a coach. So I have, my own different pathway. And that, I think, perspective has helped me really understand a lot of my athletes and their different goals. Some of them want to play in university. Some of them want to be the best provincial player. Some of them want to go on to try and win a World Cup. So just understanding what their goals are and then trying to support them through that process and understanding kind of if they have really big goals in rugby, okay, then maybe we need to give them a little bit more drive, motivation in terms of the rugby pathway and saying, like, okay, this is your goal. You want to get to this space. Then we have to think about, really focusing in on how you make that happen versus if somebody has a goal of playing for university, but never wants to play for the national team and are a multi sport athlete. Okay, great. Like, go play both of your sports as much as you can, get as much time in as you can. So, yeah, I think like a lot of the structure that we put in place comes down to the individual goals of the athlete, what they see for themselves, where they want to go to, and then trying to work backwards from that and thinking about just how we can support and facilitate them getting to that goal.
Yeah, you touched on there about multi-sport athletes, especially Nova Scotia, and we're now going into the winter season. So by building mental resilience and providing scaffolding as a coach, how can you use this to help buffer from exercise and activity burnout, but also competition burnout and help with the emotional overload of that expectation?
Yeah. I think the easiest thing that I do right now is just checking in with your athletes, seeing where they're at, trying to get to know their schedule a bit. And like I said, like what are their goals? That's a really big piece. I personally really like to go watch my athletes if they're playing other sports so that they can see that I'm invested in them as a human and not just as a rugby player. So going and watching when they play hockey or basketball and just showing up and being a supportive figure in their life. That's something that I try to do. In terms of the pressure and kind of managing their schedules and trying to manage overtraining, which is something that we're just getting into now in terms of a provincial union, is again, it's a lot about working with the athlete, figuring out what their schedule is, and then looking at like what is realistic here. Do you need to be doing 2 workouts a day? If you've got a hockey workout in the morning and a rugby one in the night, okay, maybe we can just have a conversation with your SNC, have a conversation with our SNC, and figure out what the most important thing is for you right now. And I think a lot of our high school athletes are doing that. They're really good actually about giving us that information. And I think something that's so important, and I hope it kind of spreads throughout the other sports in our province and across our country, is that we can make really good athletes. They can do their SNC in hockey and then come be a really good rugby player as well. Like they don't just need to be put inside a box. Even in Canada, we've seen so many high level, Olympic level athletes who are multi sport. So just like thinking about that through the process of them setting up their goals, figuring out their schedule, figuring out how we can be supportive. That's something I would love to see in our community a little bit more is just coaches across sports working together to really support the athletes.
Yeah, very much so. You talked about the discussing with the players about expectation management. So that comes really down to that relationship that you foster. Is that an easy process to achieve? Does it have boundaries? Does it have challenges along the way? Who sets those? Is it a partnership? Can you just discuss that a little bit?
Yeah, I think the relationships that you build with your athletes are, if you can do that really well, there's a good chance you're going to be a pretty good coach. A lot of what we do comes down to building trust between two people, whether it's on the court, on the field, off in the gym. If they trust your process, they trust that you're going to put your best effort in, they're going to follow that. But it takes effort to create those relationships. And some people are like straight away, they're like, yeah, I trust you, no problem. You're my coach. get into it, let's go. Some people are a little bit more reserved. And so, like, the initial thing that I always like to do when I get a new group is like, hey, it's very basic, but make sure you learn everybody's names. Like, if you're talking to somebody and you know their name, that's automatically going to build that level of trust with them. And then for me, I get to spend some time in the gym with my athletes. So it's the next step that I have is learning a little bit more about them outside of sports. So what's something else you like to do? What's your favorite thing in school? What's happening in your life right now? I was told at one point, and I think this was by Jack Henratty, but don't quote me on that. It's just if you ever got into an elevator with one of your athletes, do you have something else to talk to about that's not just your sport? So could you ask them about their lives or bring one thing up? I think that's like kind of a piece that just sticks in the back of my mind in terms of like getting to know your athletes and creating relationships with them. That piece is important because again, like if they have all of these pressures coming from different people, if you're somebody that they have a good relationship with, like my view of sport is we can just use it for a tool for practicing life. You get to figure out like what risk rewards you're up against, play it out, build teamwork. Like there's a lot of things that you can learn in sport and kind of play around with that will help you in the outside world in life. So for me, I'm always thinking about how can I be a support for this person even if they're not in rugby anymore? And that's like the fundamental of where my relationship building starts from. And then I hope that often, you know, everybody will go on and do their own thing. But I love hearing from athletes down the line who have come back and want to say hi or drop into the gym or things like that. That's really meaningful for me. And that those are the moments where I'm like, okay, like we are working on building relationships and it's actually happening. So that's nice.
No,
Yeah.
it's incredible. I also think that at the different levels of your interactions, be it club, provincial, university, international, you have different levels of relationships based on the expectations that you set on the player, but also yourself. So how do you manage in your many roles that you yourself in, provincial lead into international, how does that transition change? Do you see yourself adapting? Do you see the players adapting? What's that relationship like?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing in the different environments is, like if somebody is in a Canadian environment, like Canadian national team environment, you know that they have big goals for themselves within the sport. So we can talk a little bit more about like, okay, performance level, your goals are to win a World Cup. It's going to take a little bit of extra effort. Let's talk about what that extra effort looks like. Let's talk about the things that you're going to have to sacrifice in order to get to that spot. And then, at the kind of provincial level or university level, like maybe there's outside things that we still need to manage and support them with. And maybe that's true at the national level as well. But a lot of the time, once you've gotten to that wearing a Maple Leaf jersey and stepping on the field, you have an idea of how to kind of manage some of the things at least in your life. And we really want to let them step to that next level and be like, okay, what's next? So yes, there's pressures from your family. You've had that for probably a long time. So you have some idea of how to manage those things. Yes, there's pressure from outside coaches, etc. Okay, you probably have dealt with a good group of like a 10 probably coaches by the time you're playing for a national team. So you have a different idea of relationships and how that has influenced your decision making along the way. So then thinking about like, okay, what's next? Okay, now social media becomes something that you have to start to think about. What am I putting out there into the world? How am I portraying myself? Because that's going to impact, if you get signed to a team down the line. So just thinking about what you were talking about it before, James, but just like it's a bit of scaffolding of like what types of pressures we can help support them through. So at the start, when they're in high school, maybe they don't need to think about that as much. Maybe they're not thinking about getting signed by a club tomorrow, and they don't have to think about what they're saying on social media as much, although maybe these days it's a lot more than it used to be. But just thinking about like where they're at in their lives, what's new, I guess, is maybe a good way to look at it. What's new in that environment? And that's the piece that we want to support them through, like that new piece.
Oh, very much so. I mean, you mentioned earlier on about you knew where you was going to go with your playing level, right? I thought you were a very good player representing
Thanks.
Acadia, Chelsea, the Celtics, and I think your ability stands out in its own right. But we also got to be mindful about how we expose players at the right stage so they physically develop. But providing that scaffolding will help them anticipate what's needed, but also get them to prepare and be ready for the next stage. We've just seen the university nationals finish with UBC girls doing successful, and then Guelph just finishing and winning the men's nationals just this week, which is great for those university players. And they'll all aspirations to go on further. We look over the last 12 months or so, the Canadian Sevens women's team getting to the final of the Olympics and getting silver. And this year, the 15s women's side getting to the final World Cup, which is exceptional. And we've got many, many talented athletes from the Maritimes who represented Red in both those competitions. But how do we manage players' expectation and help them create a timeline so that they can have targets and goals to achieve along that way?
Yeah, I think managing players' expectations comes down to a lot of like, what are their goals? So, what's the top peak that they're trying to get to? And then helping them learn about what that looks like. So, if you want to play for Canada and you've never watched Canada play for ever before, play a game, well, maybe that's step one, because you should be looking at who is in that spot right now. What skills do they have? Where's my gap? What do I need to develop in order to get to at least that point? Because the teams are only getting better and better and better. So you need to think about even down the line, what's the next skill this team is going to need that maybe I should start working on? And as coaches, I think our job there is to like push them in a sense of like, okay, do you know what the top level looks like? Do you know what your goal looks like? Tell me about it. Tell me about some of the things that you're going to need to make sure that you're confident in order to get to that space. And again, like let them own the journey a little bit, just giving them the tools to be like, okay, here's where you want to get to. Maybe here's where we are. So how can I support you in closing that gap so that you can achieve your goal? And then and then once you've got a plan in place, it's about like the motivation, the push, staying on top of them, working on kind of more of the skills around discipline and commitment and being able to show up, not for me, but for them because that's their goal that they want to achieve.
Very much so. And it brings us that. So that's the eye level, and we're talking about achieving the highest possible mark they can. And it's nothing but achievable if all the right steps are followed. But they have to bring it down to the manage the first step, and that is selection. How do they make the team first of all? And resilience in high performance is very challenging because you're competing against like-minded people. So how do we as coaches provide not just stability, but support for them to understand the selection process, be it on the positive side, but on not being selected and all that come with that.
Just went through a Canada Games cycle, so this is a little bit fresh in my mind, which is nice. So maybe I'll pull some examples from this. But again, at a base level, I think it comes down to having built a relationship with your athletes and then just having clear expectations along the way. So this is what our team is going to do. This is how we're going to perform. These are the skills that you need to have to be on this team, making sure all of that's clear. And then honestly, it is teaching them through the deselection process. So knowing that these are still my athletes, even if they don't get selected, and I want them to have a good experience, whether they're on the team or not. So they come in, they unfortunately will get deselected, but maybe this is the first time they've ever not been selected for a team. So it's new. It's them. Again, like level of learning of something that's new that we have to kind of support them through. And so that could look like, hey, maybe it's just an awareness piece about we're in a performance environment. It's not going to be easy. You may get selected, you may not get selected. It's not a personal thing. And it might not even be a skill based thing. Maybe it's just this is what the team needs right now. You have lots of skills yourself, but right now we need somebody who can really drive the ball down the field, or we need somebody who can kick. So this person needs to be on our team. So helping them understand that like it might not even be a default that they have, but somebody else just has an X factor that brings them into that space. And I think with the level that I work at, which is a lot of high school age athletes, it's also about supporting the parents through that process as well. Because, if you have a really good athlete at home and this is the first time that they haven't been selected for a team, okay, now maybe the parents need a little bit of support too, because now they have this moody teenager at home who hasn't made a team and they don't really know how to communicate with them or help them through that process. And I'm not living in the house with them. So I want to make sure that I can actually also support the parents and help them to understand that, this is a learning opportunity for everybody. If you don't get selected, it's thinking about what you're going to do next now and not trying to like live in that space of like, I didn't get selected. I'm not good enough. If you want your goal, then this is just a step in the process. And it's a moment very similar to like when you lose a game. How you just get to take that information back and it's just data and you get to say, okay, this is what we know that we need to work on. Great, let's try and work on it and make it better for next time. And again, like those are the controllables. So thinking about, yeah, what you actually can impact, and not letting the outside things kind of affect your mindset on achieving your goal. Like, yeah.
The framing and the delivery of that message is a skill. You mentioned there
Yeah.
about parents. When we're talking about high school into university level. When they get a bit older, they tend to stand alone and they kind of deal with that message themselves. But it's also a skill that is not easy to learn. So how do we support coaches and parents in that to ensure that they can reinforce that positive messaging and it's not necessarily a negative and everyone can learn from that experience?
Yeah, I think it's just about like being open with the expectations. And then again, like I said, like through the deselection process, offering support. So whether it's like, hey, here's an article about deselection. If you need support with this, I would suggest like having a little read through it and seeing what you can take from this, knowing that it's again, you're all really good athletes. This is not a personal thing. It's about what the team needs right now. So we have to go with this kind of profile, making sure all of that is super clear to both the parents and the athletes. And then again, like if they have questions, obviously, that's a great opportunity to kind of have an individual conversation about where somebody's at in their timeline. And then I think another thing that we can offer, especially on the rugby side of things, where it's more of a late entry age in Canada, is having a look at some of the athletes who do play for Team Canada that came into the game really late and said, like, hey, this is still a doable thing. For example, Leticia Royer came into the Canadian national team at a later age, in her 30s, I think, and has now gone on and played in World Cups. So it's available to you if you have that goal down the line and you want to stay involved in it. And just knowing that everybody's steps might look different. So your steps might not look the exact same as your best friends, and that's okay.
Of course. And I think what you and all of the provincial staff from different age grades, they're all still playing in some way and ensuring that lived experience. So then you can go through those and you can support players in the development because you're the examples. And that's true for how do you recover from injuries. Every player, coach, a match official, we all make mistakes. We're only human. How do you then support the individual player or the group of players to overcome those errors? More for mental acceptance more than anything. Similar to injuries or performance dips, what can we do as coaches then to reinforce improvement, understanding, and just a timeline of recovery through that process?
Yeah, I think the improvement and the understanding piece, like that is about setting those clear expectations again. So like identifying like where do you need to be? Where are you right now? How can we get you in between there? Like, so what is the gap that you have? The hardest part about this whole thing, I think, is sometimes when you deselect an athlete, you don't actually have a lot of touch points with them again. And it's like, how do you continue to build that relationship knowing that your athlete has these goals, understanding they're still your athlete, even if they're not on the team? Like that kind of mindset about being really holistic in your approach to coaching, not just the people in front of you, but the people who tried out for the team. For me, again, I wear those kind of two hats where I coach a provincial team, but I'm also in charge of the whole group of provincial athletes. So an athlete who doesn't make a USIN team might very well play for senior women. And it's still my job to make sure that they have the skills when they get there, if that's where they want to be. So yeah, thinking about it as a holistic kind of community, how can we make sure that our community has the skill set that they need? So what it looks like for me is working with the coaches at all of the different levels and making sure that they have the tools that they need so that when those athletes come up through the programs, I can see clearly that they understand kind of our systems and the skills that are required. I think yeah, making that really clear for the athletes, but also the coaches that you're working with. Also, the community is a really big piece as well. So if the community can see the style of play that, for example, the Celtics are trying to achieve, and they know they've got a bunch of athletes on their team who want to play for the Celtics, that would be a great way to support them is like, let's learn a little bit more about this so that we can support you through. And that's what we try and do with Rugby Nova Scotia as well, in terms of athletes who want to elevate to that national team. We have a lot of themes that come down from the national team, and we try and like that through our provincial programs. Our goal with our provincial programs is if an athlete wants to play for Canada, when they get to that space, they feel at least a little comfortable in the environment. Like, not everything is completely new. We've set them up for a little bit of success in terms of like exactly what you're saying, like off field, in the gym, what they can expect in terms of like even travel fatigue or competition. That's our goal. It's a big goal, so like we don't often it's hard to achieve, but yeah, we're trying to get there as best as we can and give our athletes the best opportunity to be successful at whatever their goal ends up being.
I think the community in Nova Scotia is key to the development of the game, but also it helps to foster those healthy rivalries between clubs, and then those club players who either go to university together or they go to provincial teams together. It's nice because it helps to push the physical elements, but also it builds relationships. So then they can trust each other and listen to the message that's be- being provided both from the player and the coach. But when we're giving those messages, I mean, me as a player and the referee and the coach, I'm probably one of my worst critics. I'm always self-analyzing, and sometimes reflection analysis becomes a really dark place. But that's only because I'm trying to get better, and you value challenges. But one thing I've had to learn over time is about self-reflection, but also reflection overall. So how do we teach, coach, nurture our players and coaching staff to use reflection rather than self-criticism?
Yeah, I have to say, like, I've been told before that my own self-reflection is one of my superpowers as a coach. So it is something that I bring into my philosophy, and every team that I coach, they're probably annoyed with me to the point of like, hey, let's get out our journals. It's time for a reflection of the day question. But for me, again, it's the piece of like just an introduction. How can we reflect so that when you get to a national team, they're not going to be giving you these reflection questions. It will be up to you to kind of know how to do that and do it on your own time. So again, at our high school level, like a real clear example, maybe we do some video. We've got our rugby journals out. We're taking notes. Some is positive, some is negative. At the end, just like giving an open question to kind of wrap up the reflections that existed, and then helping them kind of summarize all of that information that was taken in and be like, okay, so we've just watched a bunch of video. You've got a big list of things you need to work on. Tell me what your one priority is, or like what is the next thing that you can actually work on in the next game. So do we think you're going to be able to develop a kick in the next game if you've never kicked before? Probably not a realistic expectation. What's one small thing that you can actually pull from your reflection that will support you in your next step? If it's like, for example, a tournament or something. For the coaches, this is, I think, a little bit of the harder side because we are hard on ourselves. I had a session last night, and literally that we do a little debrief at the end of our sessions, just really quickly chatting to each other. And yeah, the first thing I said was something negative about my session. So, and the same thing with the coaches around me. So even right now, reflecting on it, I'm like, okay, if I'd like to model like being a little bit more positive about mine, maybe I start with a positive on myself as well in my own sessions. But I think it's important to always ensure, like, okay, yes, there'll always be things that we want to change, but what is something that has gone right here? What's something I make sure I want to keep for next time? And yeah, for the coaches that I work with in our provincial programs, I hope to model those things. That's one of my goals. And then from with my facilitator hat on, I do my best to, if it's not a skill that they have, support them with just some open questions about their session. And it can be really simple. It can be just like, tell me about your session. What happened here? Again, a nice thing is I get to work with a lot of our coaches in the off season through our academy programs. And then my goal with our summer programs is to not necessarily come in and step on toes and do this, do that, but just again, provide really good questions for the coaches so that they can get to thinking a little bit more about what they want to put on the field on performance day and, how they're trying to get that information across to their athletes. Those are the two big things. So yeah, being able to ask really good questions, I think, is a huge piece in self-reflection. And for me, I try to model it first and then hopefully down the line, let it become a skill that both the athletes and the coaches know that they can go back to. And it's an important part of learning.
And that comes from experience, learning through time, exposure to different events. Like this year at Atlantics, the Celtics had a really successful year. It was up in Nova Scotia, which was great. But as the senior men's coach, I'm accepting, yes, great, we've won. But actually, my first thought process is, what did we do wrong? What can we do better? What do we need to improve on? And I guess that's natural because you always want to be better going forward. But also listening to what you've just said, and also with other messages through this podcast, is you've got to accept reward. You've got to reward yourself and accept that. And sometimes, having a bad day is not a bad thing. It's a part of the reflection process. As coaches, our job is to nurture, mentor our players and give them an environment that they can grow. But we also need to support our coaches. Some of them are new to coaching, some of them very experienced, but they still go through that experience of, what did I do right today? Because when someone says, how did it go? Sometimes the first thing is, oh, I could have done that better. What did I do wrong? Instead of just owning, you know what? I thought my session did really well today. I did this. I planned this ahead. All this went well. The players enjoyed it. In essence, you should be proud of. But as a coach, you also need to look at our players. How do we push them to a point where, yes, physically and on a playing side, they learn the skills so they can be successful. But how do we build resilience through adversity by creating environments so they fail to overcome that failure? Because failure is something that we need to learn, right? So how do we as coaches do that? How do we design sessions to incorporate adversity?
Yeah, it's such a good question. And you're right. Like resilience is huge in performance sport. If you can't get back up after getting knocked down, you probably won't last very long in performance sport. So it's a huge skill. Like every performance athlete will need to experience this at some point. Yeah. Again, this is like something that we hope to set our athletes up here in Nova Scotia so that once they get to that level, they've experienced some sort of like resilience mindset that they'll need. I didn't even greater degree once they get to the top levels. I think what we can control as coaches, like we can't necessarily control the outcome of the game. So a win or a loss, like take that for what it is. And you're right. Like it's either like, let's celebrate the fact that we did good on this today, or let's take that data and do better and see what we can get. The most impact that we can have, I think, as coaches, a lot of the times is our training sessions. So how do we build resilience into our training sessions? How do we build like some degree of failure into our training sessions? I think it's a lot about managing kind of the group dynamics through the process. So at the start of a season, maybe you don't want to have a ton of failure right off the bat. Maybe you want them to have like experience success a little bit more at the start of your season. And then as you progress through your season, they build trust with each other, they build trust with you. That's when you can kind of push them to the edge a little bit more and a little bit more. And that can come from, it could be as easy as if my athletes are not good at catch pass, okay, let's add in some defenders and make it really hard, make catch pass really hard. Down the line, maybe it looks like, okay, we'll get our senior women to run against the U18s and make sure that, they have a level of challenge put in front of them where I know I've planned that it's going to be difficult and then supporting them through that. So being like, okay, today, guys, this wasn't our best. This wasn't our best. Again, looking at the gap, how can we get to that spot where we're really happy with our performance on the field? And then again, like letting them own the process a little bit. So if you set up the environment to have those failures exist, they can start to see the gap and they can start to see where they need to get to. And then they can like own the process in trying to get there. They are competitive a lot of the time by nature because they're in sport. So often I feel like you don't have to like push them to be super competitive. But when you do, like you can throw that in there as well. You can use a game, you can use, points or whatever you have to make it more competitive in your environment. But again, I think it is a lot about the group dynamic. So where you're at in your season, how does that play a role in how much pressure you want to add? And then using that pressure through the season to develop resilience so that when they're in a gold medal final, 1 point score differential, the pressure that they feel is not new. It's not the first time that they've experienced that, and they can trust each other to work together under that level of pressure.
Very much so. I mean, a big part of your role is mentorship, and you do that through both young players and coaches alike within Nova Scotia. Mentorship for you and also for us as coaches is a way of helping shape our young athletes' identity, both as rugby athletes, but as individuals, so they can take those great skills into life outside of sport. So how do we as coaches help guide our players through culture, belonging, any behavioural standards that we incorporate, like codes of practice and so on within rugby, so they can use them further afield in their own life.
Yeah, I think a lot of it comes down to like, as a coach or the lead of a program, it's important to model the behaviors that you expect of your athletes. I think it's like, it's not great to tell your athletes, hey, this is our expectation, and then you not live that yourself. To me, that's like a moment where trust will probably be taken away. So if that's important to you, if that relationship with your athletes is something that you're really striving to build, then modeling the behaviors that you expect of your athletes is something that's important to do. And that can just look like living through your own values. So, if you value integrity, you say you're going to do something, make sure you follow through and do it is a trust building moment between you and your athletes or you and your coaching staff. And then, so I think like modeling is maybe the first step. Again, really clear expectations of what performance looks like or what living through your values looks like. So, small example with our academy group from even last night. They were given a little bit of time to do some individual warm up on their own. They were given the session. We told them, here's what the session's going to look like. Here's your individual warm up time. This is pretty typical, but it was actually something that I expected to happen and a learning moment I expected to see. A lot of static stretching on the floor, some chatting. So we brought them back in again and said, like, hey, our expectation is that once we've given you the session plan, you understand the movements you need to warm your body up for. Tell me what some of those movements could be. Okay, shared some examples. Okay, how does that compare to what we just did? They're like, okay, not at all. Thank you very much. Okay, here's an extra 2 minutes. Let's go change that. So again, just like A, modeling all the cultural behaviors that you want, and then B, just like letting those moments turn into a learning opportunity. So for me, I expected that to happen. So it was built into the session. Say the expectation that we have of you in our warm up. You guys didn't hit it. Try again. It's okay. Like, it's okay to fail. Try this again. And now that we are all on the same page and we have that expectation laid out, next time we come in, this is what I expect to see. So, yeah, being open about that, letting them fail and then bringing them back to what the expectation is, and then holding them to that higher standard once you've had a chance to fail and chat about it. I think those are the big things. Because again, for me, like I work a lot with teenagers and they're just starting to learn about the world and how to be in the world and what a normal expectation of a human in society is. So helping them like live through that a little bit, letting them fail, make mistakes, and then just pulling them back in to be like, hey, if you could do this again, because obviously we didn't like the outcome there. If you could do this again, what are you going to change? Once you have that laid out, then it's okay holding them to that standard each time.
And that's a dual relationship, isn't it? So coaches, some reliance on senior players to help reinforce that positive messaging, but it's a coming together to ensure that environment is created and grows and builds for future teams that come within that environment. You mentioned there about people coming in. I think this is true in every sport. I go and warm up, and the first thing they're doing is doing some random static stretch. I've probably done that myself. But one thing we can share as coaches is, and it's a big term that I believe in, is true in all life, is empathy. We've been there, we've experienced them moments. So how do we support our young athletes through the use of empathy? You alleviate any fears, any nerves, or any self-doubt that may be fostering within themselves when they come to high performance environments.
Yeah, I think you're dead. Like that word empathy is big. It incorporates a lot of things. But for me, at that kind of base level, it's just like understanding that everybody has a different lived experience. And what could be true for me might not be true for somebody else. And coming into every situation with a little bit of an open mind and thinking about, like, okay, that kid over there is not listening today, but where did they come from? Did they have a hard day in school? Did they fail a test? Did they fight with their parents before they got here to me? And just thinking about like, how can I approach that situation, not knowing where they're coming from and trying to be a person to person communication instead of just like, this is about this. This is what's important right now. And just, yeah, having a holistic view of a person and trying to stay open. That's what I think empathy kind of boils down to is just we're all people, we've all make mistakes, we all come from different experiences. And the more that we can remember that, I think the more we can be open to each other and support each other through things instead of just being so closed off from the beginning.
Not very much so. I mean, a lot of coaches have a lot of great qualities, through life experience as a player in the professional life. They may be mothers or whatever environment they come from, and they grow and have a sense of compassion. But when we having coaching sessions, we do heavily rely on player involvement, interaction, and maybe the senior players helping nurture the younger ones. But how do we, as coaches, foster an environment that the leadership comes from within? How do we nurture that so then they can take a little level of ownership, really, of how the session can be created?
Yeah, I think everybody kind of has their own way of doing this and like dripping that leadership moment in. I think for sure it depends kind of like what age group you're working with and, who you have in your environment already. But at the end of the day, I think again, like it boils down to, do you know your athletes? Do you know who the natural leaders in your group are? Figuring that out at the start and then trying to give them a little bit more responsibility. And again, that can look differently depending on what age group that you're working with. It could be as simple as in the weight room, hey, one person is in charge of always making sure that we've cleaned up after ourselves, or one person is in charge of doing our warm up each week, or maybe that rotates through people as folks start to get more comfortable with the environment and being there. And just thinking about different ways you can drip leadership moments in. Because first of all, I think the athletes really like it. As a high school kid coming into an environment and then being a leader of a group, that's like an exciting thing that I think a lot of them look forward to being that person in that space. But like, again, not everybody is there at the start. I was very shy when I was in high school. Like, I was not a talker at all. So being thrown into a leadership position when I was in high school was probably not what was gonna make me most comfortable in that moment. So again, that's what I mean, like, when you come back to, like, knowing your athletes, know who's ready for that, like, leadership moment, that next step, and then allowing them to have it. And again, I got an opportunity to work with the senior women, our provincial senior women this past year, and we just work with a leadership group. And a lot of the women who play on this team are also my friends off the field. So knowing like we're coming into this space, I'm here to help facilitate what you guys want to achieve, and let's work together to figure out what that is. So again, at the high school level, maybe it's just who's going to take care of the warm up today, or who's going to, practice being a captain in our fake training game today, or with a group that's a little bit more developed. Okay, maybe you have a leadership group and maybe they're actually coming up with the plan for your season and you're just there as a coach to facilitate that happening. So thinking about your group, thinking about the leaders that already exist, and then if you're like, oh my gosh, I don't think I have one person in this group who's a leader. Can we build up the confidence of people around us? So maybe it starts with just something really small, like, hey, you're actually really good at doing this. Would you mind giving a demonstration to our group today? And if it's somebody who's not super confident, maybe you ask them outside of the group before doing it right in front of the group. So just like, again, understanding the group dynamic, who you're working with, and the level that they're at. I think all of those things come in to play. So yeah, I think it's very contextual. Maybe it's a summary of what I'm getting at here, but there's lots of different ways to do it. Yeah.
I definitely believe it is the relationship between you and your players, because that relationship helps to foster the intensity of the program, the challenges you can set them, and then they want to push the boundary to improve and increase that. And I like you, were very shy, very quiet as an individual growing up. I joined the military, and that you can't be quiet in that job. And I think that's helped me in my future life. But when you're a player, again, regardless of what position you are, if you're going to play high performance rugby, you can't sit at the back of the classroom. You're going to make yourself known. You're going to have presence on the field. And I think having compassionate leadership from coaches alongside a level of empathy in the delivery of the message can foster improvement, but also give the players that trust that when someone says, "Mate, I want you to be the captain today," it's coming from a position of trust, and that's because of the relationship built between the coach and the player. Now we look at mental skills in sport and how we share that development. We've just seen the nationals finish, and what was really good, really, is we had 8 different teams, different areas of the country, a really rich pool of talent, both male and female, but all playing with a diverse playing structure. Not one team was similar. And I think the players learn from that. They get to expose to that, but equally the coaches. So what do we do as coaches then after being around that environment manage emotions for our players? What do we do to help manage their emotions when the game gets challenging? These high stress, risk and reward, the moments in a game that could be win or loss. How do we, as coaches, create that environment to learn from that experience?
Yeah, there's kind of two pieces here. There's like, what can you do in advance to set them up for success in those moments? And then what is actually happening in those moments and how you can support them through that. So I kind of spoke already about like, building resilience into your training. What does that look like? For us in Canada, a lot of the times it means like creating game environments if you can't get your hands on a lot of games and helping them to live and train through a bit of pressure so that in the game, it's not the first time that they feel completely under pressure. They've experienced that before. However, like in the game, things can obviously feel different. You're against a team that you don't know. It's not your teammates. It's another coach on the sideline. The referee in the middle maybe that you've never experienced before. For me, again, it comes back to like modeling the behavior that you expect of your athletes. That's first step. So, we see lots of coaches on the sidelines going a little bit, in my opinion, it's a little much. I want my athletes to be thinking clearly through the game. I need them to be making good decisions, whether they're losing or they're winning. I think that, and this is kind of my personal philosophy, but I think a lot of that means they need to have a bit of a clear mind. And that doesn't need to be all the time through the whole game. I want them to play with their emotions as well. So if you're really fired up, like use that. Go into the game and use that, no problem. But if we're all hothead moment in a game, then nobody has the ability to make a good decision for us. And so I think like modeling the behavior of staying as neutral as you can in order to support those decision-making moments where like, again, maybe a kick to touch or a kick to penalty can make the difference in a win and a loss in a game. So having your brain turned on and being able to think clearly through those moments, it can be important when we're under super high pressure and in, the final play of an intense game. So yes, in those moments, I think for me, it's all about modeling the behavior that I expect, having clear messaging. So not coming on and saying we need to fix 16 different things in my brain, even if I know that there's 16 different things that we need to fix, doing my very best to prioritize what can they actually implement right now and what's going to make the biggest difference in the game are kind of two questions that I try and ask myself. And then in terms of like actually the mental piece around the pressure on the field, pulling them back into the moment. So it depends where you are. Sometimes as a head coach, we don't actually get to interact directly with the team. You're up in a box somewhere or off at the back of the field and you're only mic'd up. So then your messaging needs to be on point because your message goes through a coach who then has to go to the team. So being really clear on what you need from the team in those moments. If you've got a chance to actually be connected with your team, then it can feed off of your energy. They're going to know if you're mad. They're going to know if you're stressed out. So taking a breath yourself before you go into those moments so that you can give that clear messaging so that you can model the behavior of clear thinking in order for decision making. I think those are kind of maybe the two big pieces. So again, like in training, but then more on the bench, on the sidelines, it's about what you're bringing in terms of your energy into the team.
Well, I completely agree. And some of that messaging used to be, oh, you're starting, you're on the bench. It's now you're starting, you're the finishers. And, the bomb squad is being used quite a lot recently, right? Through forwards coming on the field, making a massive influence on the game. I look at the emotional load both players, coaches, and match officials have, and how do you manage that? So you mentioned there about coaches. I'm as guilty as many. I get too emotionally involved in the game because I think there's importance on the game. We live in the moment and it's difficult to rein yourself back. But I also believe that your team mirrors your behavior, mirrors your emotional stress. Are you transferring that across, then your team's not going to perform. So I completely agree with that. Equally with match officials, in a lot of cases, match officials turn up. They might be familiar to the players. It might be a high pressure game, and they've got to manage the emotional load to ensure that they're accurate and they don't wilt under pressure. And I think what's really good about Nova Scotia's rugby in general, but the community, we support each other to ensure that we try and get the best product on the field, players, coaches, and match officials. And we're all working hard to achieve that. But as I said, emotional energy can be challenging. So we need to do things for players to ensure that they're exposed to it, but we don't hold too much expectation on a player. So how do we build an environment so it's psychological management and load is shared both individually for the player, but for the collective of the team?
Think again, like, we'll certainly come back to knowing your team and knowing like who actually has the capacity to do some of these things at those pivotal moments. That's important. And then hopefully, everybody's got strengths and weaknesses. So using those strengths, if you've got somebody who's really great at hyping the team up, for example, okay, give them their moment to be really good at that. If it's not you as a coach, do you have an assistant coach that's really good at it? Um, when I first started coaching, this was way back in the day, like U16 women, I was nervous, super nervous, and tried to remain neutral, but I knew that I needed to get my team hyped up. We had a lightning, I don't know, pause in the game. I had to go back inside, come back out. It's raining. They're not excited to play at this moment. They're just cold. And I knew that that wasn't my strength as a coach. So I was like, okay, who around me can do this and get this team hyped up? So understanding like the people that you have around you, I think, and that's just one example. Maybe there's a time in the game where you actually have to bring people down to earth. So like, is your captain really good at just clear, concise, like, hey, everybody, let's come together. Let's take a breath. What do we need to achieve right now? Knowing which of those people to go to for the different kind of moments and the energy pulls that you need, because like being able to do it all as one person, as a coach, is really difficult. And I don't think anybody should expect themselves to be able to be all of those different characters for your team. But I think that's why it's important to get to know the people who you have on your team so that you can rely on them in different.
And that's all personality driven in the sense those challenges come together where different characters clash in a training environment and then obviously learn from each other. But then in diverse situations, like you just mentioned in the game, how can your players grow from that? How do they react and change? So we as coaches have got to try and provide environments that are adaptable, stress focused, risk and reward. How do the players learn from that? What feedback do you get from players that your messaging is getting across as a coach? But equally, then it can grow your next training session.
I think the biggest one for me is like, what actions are they actually doing? If I've asked them, and this could be rugby specific or this could be values driven, what actions am I watching them do? The actions line up with the expectations, then I'm like, yes, we've got this. Like, what's next? If the actions don't line up with the expectations, then I like to jump in with questions and see if they can at least feed the information back to me. So maybe they know what they should be doing, but can't actually perform it yet or don't have the consistency to perform it yet. And then I guess those are the two main feedback loops, is a little bit of like, what are you watching them do? And then what are you hearing them say? Um, and then something else that I love is like, when they're not in your environment, are they still doing those same things? So is it actually a piece that they've brought into who they are as a player or who they are off the field? I love going back and watching our academy kids play in their high school season and seeing like, what skills did they actually pick up? I can tell if we've put a lot of emphasis on something and then they do it in their high school teams and they know that skill or they know that ideology in their high school teams and they bring that back. That for me is like huge success. If you can do it outside of our environment, I know that we've nailed it. And then on the flip side, it's like, okay, if we can't do it and we can't talk about it, okay, we got to go back to the beginning and really like, here's the first piece. At least be able to feed me back the information. And then after that, we'll see how far we can get. Yeah.
I think what I like is the environment that you have created in your time is nurturing, yes, but it's also not being fearful of share messaging, push back if you're not understood of what you're being told, or challenged because you want to be better. I think that's only going to make us as a collective better. But equally, you created an environment so where these players go into coaching because they want to give something back. It's really good to see players sharing experiences, even with against opposition. You need to do this better. You need to change your body position there. You know, you're playing against each other, but because you create such an healthy environment, you want to improve the sport collectively. And that's really good. And one of the good points of that is communication. Communication and how we use it as a performance tool. How do you do it as a coach? And how do you pass that down to your assistants to ensure that we use it as a positive way rather than directing?
I guess this is still a little piece that I'm learning about and trying to honestly like play around with. I'm definitely the kind of person who won't think on an idea too long. I like to like dive into an idea, see if it works, and then like manage what happens afterwards and fix it as we go. So I think that's still something that I'm like definitely trying to figure out. But the biggest piece in terms of communication, sharing ideas is just kind of like you said, James, is just have like an open mindset about it, knowing that for me, I love when the Celtics win, but I love seeing our athletes achieve their goals, whether it's get onto the university team that they're trying to get onto, wearing a Canadian jersey. And I know that I'm really grateful that Celtics or like me coaching them can be a step in their journey, but I understand that it is just a step. And it might not just be a step in their jersey journey to the national pathway, but a step in their life. I want it to be a positive experience and I want it to be something that they remember and look back fondly on. Thinking about that as a kind of a more of a holistic view, if I can give them a better experience by being open and sharing and learning from the people that I have around me, and, you know, it's a give and take there, then I think that that gives the best outcome for everybody in their experience with rugby. And I just have to say, like, exactly what you're saying is true here in Nova Scotia, and I see it all across the country as well. I was on a call just last week with some university coaches who had just finished obviously competing at U Sport, and they are already keen to kind of share what they had learned from their season with each other. And they're competitors. Like they're competing against each other and they're already like, "Hey, let's review my season. I'd love to share like what we were trying to achieve with you and like where we got." And if everybody has just like that open idea of like, if I can share with you, okay, it's going to push me to be better because now I have to be even better than I was because you already know that stuff now. So now what's my next step? And honestly, it kind of makes it more fun. And I really enjoy like as a coach watching other teams and trying to like think about what's their philosophies around the game. What are they trying to achieve here? Like can I see that by just watching their game and try to understand what they're the products that they're trying to put on the field. That's like kind of a fun game that I can't stop playing now when I watch a rugby game. Yeah, like within Nova Scotia, it's obviously our community is a little bit smaller than nationally. And I think everybody involved in rugby in Nova Scotia is coming from a place of wanting to give our athletes, our coaches, everybody involved the very best experience because we love our sport and because we want people to stay involved with that sport. And that's kind of what it boils down to at the end of the day. Folks who are more competitive will want to try and push it and make it more competitive. And on the flip side, folks who want to be, you know, a little bit less competitive, like there's a space there too. And we just want to make sure that, you know, everybody has a good time. So I guess that's it. That sharing and that communication piece. If anybody has great ideas, hit me up. I'm happy to communicate what we're doing and share some ideas as well. But yeah.
We're all learning, and that's what's important about the rugby community. It's no one feels that they're the finished article. There's always growth, both personally and professionally. Talking about communication, I think how we look at role models in rugby or in sport in general is huge. We got Sam Miller, who's currently away with the senior men Canadian team. We've got Tyler, we've got Cooper Coates out there. On the women's side, Olivia, Emma, Alicia, some of them have gone on to be on the world stage, but they still come back to the Maritimes and share that experience. Can you just touch a little bit on that, how that piece is important on player development?
Yeah, we're very lucky. Like you're right, those athletes, them wanting to come back and share their experiences, um, it's it like it's a huge motivator for the athletes that are here. They look up and they see, for example, like Tyler Matcham playing with Canada, and he's just you know, a guy from Pictou who worked really hard and then went on to play on the senior team. And high school athletes are seeing that and being like, okay, he's from my community, like I can do that too. And that's really special to see. I love seeing that kind of thing. So from me, like from Rugby Nova Scotia, our job is just like to allow those opportunities to happen, facilitate those opportunities to happen as much as we can. And even that step down as well is like the high school athletes that we have when their past teammates are now playing on university teams, like that also provides that same motivation. And I hope to do that for the coaches in our community as well. Is like I've had some experiences with coaching around the Canadian national team and definitely with the U18 women's. And I want our coaches in Nova Scotia to know like that is available to them as well. Those moments that we get to come back and share, it feels very maritime of, or maybe just Atlantic, or maybe just Canadian, but to come back and want to give back to the community that supported you through that process. There is a small expectation there, I think, but I also think that that's like, those are the moments of celebration that we get to have as well. Those are the people who saw you struggle through the days where nobody knew your name, or, things were hard and you didn't know exactly what your next steps were going to be. And these were the people around you who were supporting you. And I think the ability to come back and share that information is super motivating. It's exciting. But again, we don't celebrate things as often as we should. And so it gives an opportunity to also celebrate those people and those moments. So yeah, that's like a win-win situation. So we love to see that. And hopefully we get to see a couple more happen in the future.
Completely. It's used for the community because obviously the players can see them as a realistic target for them because they see some from the community achieving that goal. I see it with all those players coming back to the province and sharing those experiences, helping coach high school, club, university teams. It's incredible to see because you're right, it probably doesn't get mirrored everywhere. I'd like to also at this moment in time give a big shout out to Cooper Coates. I'm a coach of Acadia and we're playing Dalhousie at Dal, and he's the assistant coach. And he took time out to speak to two of my players, Nate Pugh and Ryder Kanowski, who have aspirations to go to Pride and further afield. And even though we're against each other in a really competitive game, he took time out to speak to them, give them some top tips and help manage their expectation, which you can only get here in the Maritimes, which is great to see. Emma, as we come towards the end, are there any final thoughts on mental scaffolding that you can add to the podcast, which will add support, mental resilience in our players and coaches going forward?
Yeah, I guess like I'd love for what I'm saying to kind of connect with everybody. So again, it could be super contextual, but like the first thing is like getting to know the people around you, whether that's your assistant coaches, your S&C, your athletes, the referees, and it doesn't need to be so formal. Like we think about like what is step one, what is step two, here are all the check boxes I need to tick off. It doesn't always need to be so formal. It can be a conversation, it can be a text message, it can just be asking somebody about their life at the start of practice that has nothing to do with rugby. That trust building will give you the ability to push and scaffold the mental pieces on top of it. So like getting the base right is something I think that all of us can strive for, and all of us can really work to make that as solid of a foundation as we can. And then on top of that, it's about thinking what pressures is this athlete going to face down the road, and how can I drip that into the environment so that again, once they get to that big stage, it's not the first time they've experienced it, or how can I continue to support them through those pieces? So again, yeah, like building your trust foundation at the start, getting really good relationships, and then dripping in the little pieces that you think might come to them depending on their goals down the line.
Emma, thank you very much for joining me today and sharing your insight on, especially around mental scaffolding. It can only go on to improve both as a player and a coach going forward, so you have the skills to get through the challenges that come your way. What I admire about your work with Rugby Nova Scotia is it aligns very clearly with my podcast. Transformation begins from the inside out. We've got to look after our minds as much as our bodies. Rugby is more than a sport. It comes with resilience, identity, and self-belief. Mental scaffolding, it helps build our young athletes. It will stay with them for the rest of their life. But your impact that you're providing in Nova Scotia and further afield goes beyond the pitch. I'm grateful for your insight today and thank you for sharing. I hope the listeners will take a lot on board from what you've shared and put it into their own practices, both as a player and a coach. So if you enjoyed this podcast today, please like, share and subscribe wherever you're listening, be it on Apple, Spotify or Amazon, or you can watch it on YouTube. The name is in the description box. As many as you know, I'm a military veteran living with PTSD, navigating my own journey with mental health. This podcast is part of my mission to create meaningful content that support others on the way. So if you'd like to continue this content and getting these conversations to you, please support me by buying me a coffee. The link is in the description below. If we get our development with the youth right, rugby becomes more than a sport. It becomes a place where young people learn resilience, identity, who they are, and who they potentially could be.